Wait, are you are you gonna count me in? Whatever. I'm just gonna go for it. Welcome to the Queen's Lead podcast. I'm your host, Amy Singleton, and as a child of the 80s, I'd love to say queens rule, but they don't. Queens lead. Being a queen means you are worthy to be a leader of people. The guests on our show do exactly that. They are leading the way in their businesses, families, and communities. And they're taking their rightful place in the spotlight, leading and inspiring the developing queens in all of us. Welcome to the Queen's Lead podcast.
Now here's your host, Amy Singleton, the queen of realness, leading conversations about business, life, and the real shit you want to know.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Queen's Lead podcast. I'm your host, Amy Singleton, and today I am so excited to welcome Marisol Erlacher. I know it's going to get that butchered, but I am excited to welcome her. She is coming to us from Denver, born though in Illinois to teenage parents. She told me on our previous call, like we kind of grew up together, so it was no surprise that as a young little tiny adult, she grew up to be a therapist and has been for the last 20 years. But now she's doing less one-on-one therapy and more coaching of teams to help them get basically on the right page and get their culture straight. Is that right, Marisol? Welcome.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
Absolutely. Marisol also hosts a podcast, does all kinds of speaking engagements and training. So Marisol, welcome, first of all, and tell us about what you've been up to that you're excited about just here recently, what you're working on.
Yeah, I think that, part of my transition out of doing individual therapy has really been focused on helping build resilient teams and really helping build supportive cultures for organizations and companies that might be struggling. They might be struggling with, ineffective teams, absenteeism, just an overall malaise in their culture. And so I'm really there to try to help shift that and then also help employees build skills that they need to sometimes be able to deal with a lot of the stressors that they are confronted with day to day.
Yeah. Nothing will stress you out like work.
And it's where we spend the majority of our time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we briefly touched on little girl you, born in Illinois. Take me back. What was little girl Marisol like?
Yeah. So I always say, like, as I was sharing with you, as a young girl who was very introverted and born to teenage parents, my mom was 16 and my dad was 17 when I was born. And we essentially grew up together. And I think that was a realization that I came to later in life. But my parents will definitely tell you that I even as a young girl, I acted like I knew everything, like I had the answers, and they just listened to me. And like I said, I stepped into the right profession as a therapist because people come to me as individuals hoping that I have the answers to solve some of the issues that they're dealing with in their life. But overall, I will say that I was a very reserved child. And I think, growing up with parents who were really trying to resolve a lot of their own trauma, they were trying to figure out how to raise a family, become adults, how to, just figure out life and without a lot of support. But I grew up, my dad is Colombian. He immigrated here to the United States when he was about 14 years old. And my mom comes from a border town in Texas. And they ended up in the same neighborhood and came together. And like I said, I grew up with a lot of family members. I grew up with a lot of support around me, but also parents who were trying to figure it out along the way.
Yeah. Like I think as we get older and we start kind of checking back in with this childhood us, we really, and especially those of us who have kids or have teams or people that are dependent on us, in a lot of ways, at least I have started giving my parents a lot more grace than I used to when I was in my 20s and thought I knew it all. The older I get, the less I know, and the more I know about the importance of the relationship and the feeling that we give and receive from one another is really more important than any little factor, figure, or incident, that could have occurred in the past. So,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
So as a young child, you said you were surrounded by a lot of family members. Was it just kind of natural for you to take the lead, or you said you were also quiet? So were people just like confiding in you, or what kind of sparked that interest of you going, man, I really like to hear and help people solve their problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a progression of a lot of, I think initially when I was young, I was very bookish and I loved to read a lot. And it was
Yeah.
really, I think, a lot of escapism for me, trying to find and create different worlds outside of the world that I was experiencing. And so I
Yeah.
really wanted to be an English teacher. I felt like I was so impacted
Oh,
by
hmm.
teachers in my life that really gave me this gift of of reading. And so I wanted to be in that world. And then I think just kind of through the evolution of different experiences, I realized like, no, I actually really enjoy being with people and helping people. My very first uh, when I graduated from high school, I actually became an AmeriCorps member. It was the first
Wow.
year that the AmeriCorps program had started, so that was a long time ago. It
Wow.
was under Bill Clinton's administration, which tells you how long ago that was. And I was working for the American Red Cross, and so that was
Wow.
kind of the initial, I think, introduction to like what is it like to help people. And I think from there,
Yeah.
and being in the nonprofit world and understanding what that is and how to be in communities. And so I think that was the first step of me starting to realize like this is what I like to do. And then in my undergraduate program, I was a pre-counseling major, and primarily because I was working in communities, working with young people.
Mm.
And I thought, well, the best skill that you can have when you're working with young people is to learn how to counsel them. And so
Yeah.
that's how I ended up in that program in my undergraduate, when I was getting my undergraduate degree. And then my advisor said, I think you have a skill and a talent, and you should really consider being a therapist. And that
Wow.
really just propelled me to do what I have done for the past 20 years. I always say that my path was a little haphazard. I kind of just was like, sure, I should probably do that.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like it's given me the opportunity, like you were saying, Amy, I think part of the gift of therapy for me, being a therapist, has been to learn and understand myself more deeply, because I've
Yeah.
been so committed to that in my professional life that it's really, I think, enhanced my life overall. So I feel like professionally, it was the right fit, but it also really helped me personally.
And now you're really kind of bridging that gap of the therapy and the teaching. I mean, again, every woman I continue to talk to is like, I am full circle back to like my roots, like what I felt like I was born to do when I was young.
Yeah.
They're taking all of those kind of finite experiences and projects that we've had over the years and kind of like you said, tripping into our purpose. Like it's so beautiful to see.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so funny, like, what you were saying, part of, like, my childhood, I never would have imagined, like, I love speaking on stages. Like, I
Mhm.
really feel that's part of my purpose, and,
Yeah.
like you said, I think because I love teaching, um, but I never would have thought that as a child, like, that I would wanna be in front of people the way that I
Yeah.
am. And so, I think it's like you said, it's like this all these things come together and really guide you to what you're meant to do.
Yeah. So, speaking of being guided into what you're meant to do, a mentor of mine said one time, people don't really get it until they've suffered enough. And then once
Mm,
they've suffered enough, they get it. Like there's a difference between
mhm,
people who you just see they get it and
mhm.
some that don't. And it's the suffering in the middle that's the difference. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about the title of your podcast even is surrounded by resilience. Remind me the name.
Resilience and Resistance podcast.
Resilience and resistance, thank you.
Yeah.
Talking about the resilience that it takes, to be
Mhm.
who you are in this world, and so, I'd love to hear about a time when you felt, especially resilient.
Oh gosh, I mean, I feel like there's so many moments in my life where I felt that. I was just talking to my husband this morning. It was really interesting. And I don't know, I was actually working out this morning and this popped into my mind, which probably feels really relevant to our conversation. We have we took in a foster daughter 6 years ago when she was 6 weeks old. And that's a really long story, which is probably for another time. But we took her in with her brother, who was 12 years old. And it was very unexpected. We did not want to foster. It just kind of happened that we were able to do that. And we've been in her life for the past 6 years. And she did eventually go home to be reunified with her mom, which was our goal. And she's currently staying with us again full time because mom is not able to care for her right now and needs that type of support. And so I have a 16-year-old son and now a 6-year-old in the house, and very different experiences and not what I expected. I was really moving into a season in my life where I was like, I'm ready to be like an empty nester and like, just be free, whatever that means. Just entering into a totally different phase of life. And so to be in the midst of like raising a young child it's been really challenging. And one of the things that popped into my mind is I start to see all these intersections between my life and her life. And one of the things that I think that I experienced as a child, because again, I think no recrimination on my family. I think primarily they were traumatized individuals who were hadn't healed themselves, and so it impacted me. And one of the things that I experienced growing up was emotional abuse from some family members, where they would be really hypercritical of me and say things about me to me, and I didn't know obviously how to process it in that moment when I was a young child. And that's something that she's experienced in her own family. And I was thinking, part of the reason and the purpose that she's in my life is that I have the opportunity to help her understand that you can be resilient in spite of it, that you can heal yourself. So I think that, as I was making that connection, I mean, and obviously I've made other connections to like who she is and her life and my life and how they run, they have a lot of intersections, but that was something that popped up for me this morning. And I thought, somehow I'll be able to have that. I can share that experience with her and help her understand that, in spite of it, you can become who you're meant to be.
Yeah, that's right, man. I love that. That's, we were talking about it before, but raising your hand and being like, hey, I've been there, telling these stories of and having a shared experience with other humans. I mean, that's like at our core what we're meant to be. And when I was in, like depths of depression, had thoughts of suicide, was so low, really just didn't feel like there was anything left for me and that I didn't have anything left for others. It was because I had disconnected myself and I didn't believe that there was someone out there with a similar story as mine.
Absolutely.
Anybody that could relate. And I mean, that's my fault. I drew back, but as that like strong person in my family who everyone always looked to for the answers, when you become the one that's starting to experience that kind of anxiety and depression, and you withdraw because you feel so weak. And so I'm so proud to be a person and to be connected with other people who are willing to stand up and be like, no, come on. I've been there. Let me show you. Let me show you the way to the other side of this fire that you're in right now.
Absolutely. And that's like the beauty of this platform and like what you're doing is that you have the opportunity to like highlight people's stories and people can be seen in that. And that's such a beautiful thing. And, I think part of the impetus for me starting my podcast, which was totally like a passion project that I started in 2020. Who would have thought? I had no idea. We get it as 2020. But part of it was really wanting to highlight that this idea that women of color have to experience a lot of trauma in the workplace in order to elevate themselves to be in higher level positions, that part of that journey is experiencing trauma in the workplace, and that we have this shared lived experience, and also that we have to overcome a lot of trauma in our personal lives in order to be at the table. And, that resilience is, I think, a huge part of what makes us unique,
Yeah.
and brings value to so many different spaces. But, I think that sometimes, like you said, other younger women of color who are more isolated, don't know that, and feel
Yeah.
really alone, feel as though like I'm the only one having this experience, or I'm the only one who's had to overcome, whatever type of trauma they've experienced in their childhoods or in their adulthoods. And so
Yeah.
it's so important to be able to share those stories so that people can be seen and feel like, there's a reflection in you.
Yeah. That's so good. Um, so I don't know exactly how to like word this question, but there's
Yeah.
there's this thought swimming around in my mind. Um, you mentioned having more empathy for others around you, and like that understanding of what
Mhm.
like your parents were just, they were young people, they were just trying to figure it out, right? Like my parents and so many of our other people around us. And as I started learning in through therapy and personal development, um, it wasn't I didn't have empathy for them at first. I had a little bit of like pride, In fact, my mindset coach was like, "You have a big ego, don't you?" Because I wanted. It's like, dang, this is what I'm paying you for, right? But like, it I wanted to run and share this newfound information, these revelations that I was having with these people that I just knew had all these experiences in their past, that like this information would help you because it's helped me. Um, and having to switch my mindset from you need to change because I've changed, instead of just accepting this person right where they are with the understanding they currently have, with what they're ready to receive, and working on me instead. Like, that's what's caused the most resilience in my life, I think, and I wasn't really realizing it at the time, but it just happened really incrementally.
Yeah. No,
Does that,
I
like, resonate at all?
absolutely. I mean, I think that the first time that I stepped into a therapy office, I was 19 years old.
Mhm.
So it was a long, long time ago. And I've been in therapy since that time. I've maybe taken like 2 significant breaks, but I've consistently been in therapy, and different types of therapy and different modalities. But I I I think it's been an absolute journey for me, because I think I probably had a similar response. Like, I think it's very protective. I think children who grow up in situations where they don't have someone who's a real adult, there's emotional immaturity in their parents.
Mhm.
They become parentified. They have to become little parents to like help create safety for themselves and try to like manage what's happening. And so
Yeah,
I think in that we do develop a little bit of, I think that ego is a defense for something much more vulnerable in us.
wow.
And so we develop that ego to like be like, no, I got this, and I still have that. I struggle with it all the time. Like with my parents, where I'm like, ugh, why don't you all get your act together? Like, come on already, Or I'm like,
Yes.
how much longer? But
Yeah.
I feel like I've turned a corner, and just really recently, where after all these years of therapy, I'm finally able to say like, I have a different feeling of empathy and like acceptance of them in a deeper way than
Yeah.
I've had before. I think before I had more of the like, well, they didn't know, and I
Yeah.
had more, I think, a more shallow acceptance of them. It was more of like, no, I get them. But then, as soon as I was with my dad, I would get triggered immediately, and then like, start a
Yeah.
big fight about like, something unresolved for me. And I think that's exactly the priority that we need to focus on, is like, we can't have any expectation that anyone will change, even if they love
Mhm.
us. Like, I do believe
Yeah.
that my parents love me.
Yeah.
Um, but they're on their own journeys, and our
Yeah.
journey and our responsibility as adults is to heal ourselves.
Yeah.
And and I think, and then our it's like you're saying, I think then through that, we learn how to forgive, and we learn how to truly accept where people are at any given
Yeah.
moment, but
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely had a lot of that, get your life together attitude. And still, I
Yeah.
that little
Well, I
that
think it's interesting that you say that that's like a protective mechanism because like no matter what you grew up with, right? Like there's always things that are going to trigger you that your parents could have done better on. There's things we could have done better on as parents, but um thinking about those little bossy moments as kind of protective mechanisms makes a
yeah,
lot of sense because I mean, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm 43 years old and I'm just now getting to the point where I don't feel like I am responsible for
yeah,
my parents' success or failure. Like I've been like you, like, oh my gosh, you guys get it together. What are your plans? Like, what's gonna happen if like, and I'm
right,
just worrying myself and catastrophizing every potential
right.
thought because I feel responsible for them. They are whole ass grown adults. They were before I came along. They will be long out. I mean, like, they don't need me, but why do I think that they need me? That I think they need me. Like,
Exactly. It's totally, yeah, it
yeah.
feels so backwards. I absolutely get that, where yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I also always felt over responsible as a child. That's still something I think I'll struggle with forever. I
Yeah.
think there's some things from our childhood that we heal and that become less of an issue, less like we kind of like that wound becomes so much more diminished inside of us. But
Yeah.
yeah, being over responsible, man, that one's a hard one to overcome.
It is.
I keep getting better, and then I get pulled back in. I'm like, it's like The
Yeah. I'm back
Godfather. I'm
here
like,
again. Yes. Yes. Like, why I'm not codependent. You're codependent.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I love telling
Oh my
other
god.
people what they are, and I'm like, no, I'm
That's
good.
right. We've all, at some point, if you took any entry level college course, you've all sat in an intro to psychology class and went, I know someone just like that, or I'm just
Exactly.
like that.
Self-diagnosed and diagnosed. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And now we have WebMD. God help us all.
Oh,
Uh,
jeez.
I know. If I could get my mother to quit going to WebMD and Googling all her symptoms, that would be fabulous. I think,
That's
oh, mother,
an issue for lots of people.
it is
I
true.
constantly tell clients, they're like, "Why didn't you go to WebMD?" I'm like, "I stay away from WebMD. I'm sorry.
Don't do that.
I don't
Don't
need
do
any
that.
more information."
Oh my gosh. So tell me what caused you from going 20 years in private practice to making the shift to working more with like nonprofits and teams specifically?
Yeah, there were actually two major events that happened that
Mhm.
moved me in that direction. The first one was COVID, obviously. I think what happened
Mm,
was, in the moment and when we all went into lockdown and during that time, I had friends who were executive directors and CEOs who were reaching out to me and asking me to come and speak to their teams. And everyone was
mm,
highly anxious, everyone was overwhelmed. No one, there was so much uncertainty, and everyone was moving to, working from home, and people didn't really understand what
yeah,
that was going to be like. And so I started to do a lot of, trainings for friends of mine, and I thought, wow, I really like I tapped into that love of of teaching again, and
yeah,
I, periodically throughout my career, and so that was the first kind of signal to me, like, oh, there's something here.
yeah.
But then during, COVID, the need for mental health services increased so significantly that I foolishly started to work all the time. I was seeing,
Mm,
and my primary focus is working with adults who have trauma. And so
mhm.
I was seeing a ton of clients all the time, not taking any breaks, dealing with everything that was happening in my own experience, but
Yeah.
still trying to push away this like overwhelm and burnout. And so in the beginning of 21, my family and I decided to temporarily relocate to Hawaii. A friend
Oh,
of
wow.
ours there. I know. I'm like, that's like the least relatable part of the story, right? Like, she's so while we were there and right before we left, I started to recognize like how vicariously traumatized I was. I went through a
Mm,
period probably the first week or so that we were there where I couldn't sleep. I was highly anxious. I was overwhelmed, racing thoughts, like all of the symptoms that I know are true to vicarious trauma.
Wow.
And I finally had a moment where I said, I can't do this anymore. I just need to quit. I just need to
Mhm.
someone please call my clients and let them know I'm done. So I was talking to my therapist, and I had someone that I did consultation with, and I just started meeting with them pretty consistently, like every week, and just talking through like, this isn't a sustainable life for me anymore. And I don't
Yeah.
want to do it this way because I want to be a whole person. And
Mhm.
so I started to like re-envision, like, what would it look like? And so I decided to cut my caseload in half. I did that
Wow.
pretty immediately, and then slowly transitioned to like building a new business, and
Yeah.
then with the plan to eventually retire from clinical work. And
Yeah.
so it was really more just me coming to a place of just overwhelming burnout,
Yeah.
and recognizing that like even if you have all the skills, you can still get there. And that, I think people need to understand that. That's why, I feel really compelled to talk to people about it, because we can live in that state for a really long time and just keep
Yeah.
pushing through. And so, yeah, those were the things that motivated me.
Wow. So that was actually the conversation with my previous guest, was talking about, pivoting direction, especially,
Mhm.
you know, I was even saying to her, like, people my age, at least from Oklahoma, especially, like, you were taught when you start something, you finish it.
Yeah.
And like, so there's so much guilt for people like who are facing decisions like,
Mhm.
is now the time to stop in this business? Is now the time to change jobs? Is now the time to adopt a child, to get a divorce, to like the massive decisions that people
Right.
are facing, and they just get so paralyzed by that fear.
Mhm.
Can you talk
Absolutely.
about kind of like what you went through with that, and what maybe some clients you've dealt with
Oh, for
have
sure. I
faced with
mean,
that?
it's so like when I was, I was like, well, I'm gonna cut half of my income. I probably need to like create a plan on what I'm gonna do.
Yeah. Right?
But yeah, but at that point I didn't care. I was like, cut half my income, I don't care, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But I decided to do a strategic plan. So I hired a company to help me do that. And it was really interesting because like I love strategic planning. This is also a weird part of my personality. Like I'm like, give me all the sticky notes, tell me what my rocks
Yeah.
are. Like I need Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 plans, like I love it.
Yeah.
So when I came to the session, I walked in and I was like, okay, where are my sticky notes? And and there were like three people sitting around a table. One of the women who is leading the facilitating the strategic planning, or someone who works specifically on branding, and then there was a woman who was like a coach, and she did a lot of like more energetic work around like much deeper work. And I was like,
Yeah.
why do I hear these people here?
Yeah.
And one of the things that they asked me a bunch of questions, which was really helpful and hard. And one of the questions she asked me was, who are you in this world? Like,
Mm.
how would you define yourself? And so of course I'm like, partner, mother, friend, therapist, all the things. And so
Yeah.
she was writing them down, and she said, what if I did this? And so she's crossed out therapist. And I was like, I had this like intense reaction. I started crying.
Wow.
It's like, well, why are you having this reaction? I said, I don't know. And I realized like it had become such a part of my identity. Like who I
Mm.
was in the world was a therapist. And
Yeah.
in some ways I'd lost who I was to that. And letting go of that has had to be a process of grief, and me understanding, relearning, like, who am I in this
Yeah.
world? And am I okay letting that go? And so I
Yeah.
think we define ourselves so strongly by what we do. And, I think I'm in part of my journey is like, it doesn't matter what you do. It really matters like what happens inside,
Yeah.
who you are able to become in light
Yeah.
of everything that you're doing. And so I
Yeah.
think that's been a huge part of my transition, is letting go and grieving, and allowing myself to grieve the loss of, what it meant to be a therapist. And
Yeah.
similarly, like I think what you're saying is like I think generationally we're so like prone to being like, I must do the thing until I die. And
Yeah.
I had so much hubris that when I started, I used to teach a class at one of the local universities in their counseling program, and I told the students, in 30 years, I'm going to be the trauma therapist that lasts. Like, you can call my phone number, and I'm still going to be in practice. Like, because
Wow.
trauma therapists have a short shelf life. We like burn out real
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
It's like, and then that was partly a motivation for me. I was like, I said I was going to do it for 30 years. I got
Yeah.
to do it for 30 years. And I was like, that's
Wow.
like, no one's going to call you. No one remembers
Yeah.
when you said that.
Yeah. It's so relevant and so relatable right now. That's what I was talking about with those finite projects that we have. I was a registered nurse since
Yeah.
2004. And I
Wow.
literally I have not worked as a nurse since 2012. And it was this past September that I finally stopped doing the CEUs and put my nursing license
Yeah.
on inactive status. Like, I haven't worked with it in over a decade, and it was such a part of my identity that I that I just couldn't let it go. It was like that. It was partial identity and partial, like, backup plan.
Of course.
And,
Yeah.
I think so often, especially as mothers, we tie our identity to our children, and then next thing you know, we're in our late 40s, early 50s going,
Mhm.
I don't know this person I'm married to, and my kids who needed me forever are gone. Who am I now if I'm not a mom, if I'm not a nurse, if I'm not a therapist, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, also the vision that I had for myself in the future. Like, I had plans around, like, who I would be as an older therapist, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm grieving the loss of that and, like, trying to reimagine, like, can I have a bigger vision for myself?
Yeah.
Because like you said, this is so finite. Like, me being a therapist, what does it really mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, can I re-envision something bigger?
Wow, that's so
Yeah.
good. Thank you so much for opening up with this conversation. I think it's very timely
Yeah.
for a lot of people right now who feel unstable, and who are who are looking for
Yeah.
purpose, for something bigger, for something that can unite and not divide. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about? I think Do you have a free resource on your website?
Yeah, I'm gonna be putting up I'm
Or
actually Amy and I were talking about this. I'm, like, in this
Yes,
transition of rebuilding my website, and there will be a free resource, and it's a
perfect.
checklist to see, for people who, for CEOs, executive directors, anyone who's, like, managing people to see, is their team like, what supports do they need for their team?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Bring your team together. You will watch yourself go so much further whenever everybody is like in the same boat, paddling the same way toward, arm in arm toward the problem, not arm in arm against each other, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Totally.
100%.
100%. We'll put all of Marisol's links down in the show notes, and you guys go visit her website, check out her socials on LinkedIn. And if you are an executive director for a nonprofit or working with a team that needs to be united, that needs to get on the same page with a very experienced therapist who knows how to work through these problems, give Marisol and her team a buzz, and they will take care of you. Marisol, thank you for being my guest, and thank you for being a queen that leads.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
The Queen's Lead podcast is recorded worldwide and produced by the kick-ass media team at the Height Digital home base in Nicaragua. Until our next episode, stay real, Queens, and go lead. Remember to tap that follow and leave your review. For freebies and more real, inspiring content you love, go to amysingleton.net and connect with Amy on her socials at @TheRealAmySingleton.
One more thing. This is the legal language, what my lawyer wrote and what I need to read to you. This podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am Amy Singleton, and I'm just your friend. Although I may speak to many on this show, I am not a psychotherapist, a business coach, a doctor, a CPA, a lawyer, or probably anyone who should be giving you professional advice. This podcast is not a substitute for a relationship with your doctor, coach, or any other licensed professional. Got it? Good. Now go be a queen and follow me at The Real Amy Singleton.